For more, let's speak now with Karim Hijazi. He's a founder and CEO of Prevailion. He joins us from Houston, Texas this morning. Karim, thank you so much for joining us. Let's talk about how this latest global hacking campaign that the U.S. and its allies are accusing China of are different from traditional cyber espionage, which, let's face it, many other countries have also traditionally carried out. I mean, how grave a threat are such tactics?
Thank you for having me. And I think the greater issue is the fact that it was such a sprawling attack that it got access to something like Exchange, which is a mail server from Microsoft, as I think we all know. And one of the most challenging aspects of this is that not only did they get access to be able to proliferate the same threat to all of the recipients of those emails that they could have gotten into, but it also gave them an entire listing of the kind of partnerships and ecosystems that exist within the targets that they actually did indeed impact. So the challenge here is that we don't really know how far and wide the threat has perpetuated by way of that access. It was just a perfect sort of storm of tool that they were able to get their hands on and get into, and then the widespread proliferation of the kind of malware that they're likely deploying out there. So it's not too terribly distant from kind of the sprawling effects of what we've seen with things like Kaseya or with SolarWinds, where this one organization essentially acts as a hub with all the spokes to it. So all the organizations attached to that organization, by whatever means they are in danger too. So I think that's what the gravitas of that is what actually impacted everyone. And the fact that it's a Microsoft product is so widespread, it makes it even more compelling.
So companies, government entities, universities targeted for their confidential information. The short-term goal here looks like, extortion or maybe disrupting economies and businesses. But collectively, Karim, what are the long-term objectives of attacks like these? Is the goal possibly undermining U.S. influence, or is the end game really just access to that data?
It's a good question. Traditionally, nation-state actors like China tend to be focused on intellectual property theft. Effectively, they're looking for things that they can leverage in country themselves. The mandates effectively given to either government employees or even the general population there is, if you can source anything good for the country, you will profit, you will win. So it's sort of a nationwide or countrywide mandate to sort of collect what you can that will benefit the country as a whole. I think when you look at other nation-state actors like Russia and Iran or North Korea, there's much more of a attack for persistence and latent, insertion into these environments to either extort, as you mentioned, conduct some sort of psyops campaigns or use it for influence. So each sort of nation-state actor has its own initiatives or agenda in many cases. I think what was interesting about this particular attack is that the tactics and the methods were sort of a cross-pollination between what you'd see with other nation-state actors, long-term coverts or implants or malware specifically that we're talking about, sprawling proliferation across a large ecosystem. So sort of a meshing of different tactics, or what we call in the industry TTPs. And I think that's what makes this so interesting. I don't doubt that their objectives are still indeed intellectual property theft and identity collection and things like that for correlation with other data they've collected elsewhere.
Very interesting. Karim, and what wasn't actually contained in the U.S. statement was any mention of new penalties or sanctions leveled against China. I mean, what other options do the U.S. and its allies have beside the collective naming and shaming, or is that public attribution enough?
It's a debate. I think you bring up a really excellent point, which is that how far do we go with this? And then what was very unique about the statement today, which is something that we in the private sector had known for quite some time, not suggesting the government didn't know, it's just the fact that they made it a statement formally today, which is they were suggesting that China had worked with cyber criminal gangs to facilitate this attack. It wasn't explicitly the government there. Something that we'd heard as conversations had with Biden and Putin with Russia, which is, please put pressure on these groups that you proverbially have control over in some capacity. So the fact that is a challenging piece of the equation, because if it is indeed what we'll call a proxy militia and not the actual government, who do you sanction fundamentally, right? You can impose these restrictions and pressures onto the organization that is, or I should say country that may be the origins of these groups, but really, is it that country? Is it the country endorsing them, bankrolling them? Hard to say. So I think the challenge here is that the best right now that we can do from a statement perspective as a country, as the U.S., is to sort of make these statements of, stop or we're going to take action. Then comes more the offensive side of the house, which is that taking action is indeed one of the options that we do have as a country. The talent between private sector and public sector is pretty robust. It's just a matter of executing and executing on the mission at this point.
That's very interesting. A lot of attention has been on state-sponsored cyber attacks from Russia, a country widely believed to be the world's greatest cyber threat. And some argue that has actually left China to operate relatively freely up until this point. Do you think China has been less aggressive in terms of hostile acts in cyberspace? How would you compare attacks from China versus Russia?
It's interesting. I don't think they've been left I don't think they've actually reduced their efforts in any capacity. I think that it's just the classic case of you can only sort of fight so many beachheads at once, and mainstream media's reporting can really sort of only handle so much at a time. And I think that the reality is that cyber is such a asymmetric and force multiplying way of attacking an organization or a country, for that matter, or critical infrastructure. So many things go unreported ultimately that are happening. It's just a matter of what eventually bubbles to the surface. So I think that the fact that the White House made a statement that they did about China today, about an attack that happened not that long ago, but long enough where it wasn't really top of mind. I mean, a lot of the ransomware attacks that are, suggested or allegedly tied to Russian groups happened way more recently, but really this hit the surface now and today because of the fact that the statement was made. So coming from my perspective, they haven't slowed down in any capacity. They're just not hitting mainstream attention the way they probably would have if, they get the kind of attention they got today. The other one little note I'll add here is that it's a well sort of received and among the community that these nation state actors are not working alone. There's a collusion that happens between them. Russian groups may very well facilitate the access because they are indeed very capable. And then they may leverage that access or broker it to other nation states for two good reasons. Once they are able to sort of get what they need out of that organization or that victim, they'll then say, all right, have at it. It's sort of like a lion kills a zebra and then they hand it off to the hyenas, so to speak. And it creates a lot of misdirection and confusion about who the real actor is responsible for this. So that adds further murkiness to the equation.
Karim, appreciate your time and thank you for the fascinating conversation. We've been speaking to Karim Hijazi, founder and CEO of Prevailion.